So this is a drawing on a stone by Stephen Gardner, and we're going to etch it today. So the first thing we did is we looked at the drawing and tried to figure out which areas were drawn with darker and lighter crayon, and we formed what I call an etching strategy, like how we're going to process this stone. What etching does is it does two things. It makes the areas that are blank like water, and it makes the areas that are drawn like ink, and those two are going to oppose each other. The very first thing you want to do is protect the areas that are really light, not blank, because the blank areas can be etched as hot as you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to protect those areas with straight gum. First, I'm going to rosin and talc the stone, and you always do that before you do anything. Rosin. It doesn't need that much. It just has to. You just have to make sure it gets everywhere on the stone. And rosin is sticky, and what it's going to do is stick to the drawing material, and it protects it, but it also attracts this material, which is called talc. And what this is doing is it's actually making little tiny sponges in here that is going to pull the gum arabic to the blank parts of the stone that are really small because the drawing material is really close together. This also protects the drawing from hot edges. So I'm just going to protect some of the lighter areas with the straight gum. And I put it on fairly thin so that it's going to dry in a reasonable amount of time so I can start putting the other etches on. And I'm not being too worried about this because this drawing has been on a stone for a long time, so even these light areas could take a little bit of acid and not be hurt. But I'm just trying to be conservative, make sure we don't lose any drawing material. If you do lose some of your drawing, there are ways that you can do what's called counter etching and get the drawing back, but you want to try to avoid that. And now I'm going to mix my etches. So this is my straight gum. I'm going to have two etch strengths. I'm going to have a 4-drop and an 8-drop. So I'm going to write 4 right on here, and you can use tape. If you're using Sharpie right on this, make sure you clean these off when you clean up. And so while this is drying or setting up, I'm going to mix my etches. So I want 40 milliliters, if it's a small stone like this, 40 milliliters of gum arabic. And then the calculation that I made, and I looked at an etch chart that kind of helps me determine that, and that's in the Tamarind Guide. Make sure you wear gloves and goggles. Nitric acid is not safe. It's not going to eat the flesh off your bones, but it's going to probably make you very itchy. If you get this on you, just rinse really, really, really long time, really well. And anyway, we're going to put drops of nitric acid into this, corresponding to my number. So this one's going to get 4 drops. And this works by, this little groove here needs to line up with this for it to drip. And just, I always loosen it up a little bit because you don't want it to drip real fast. So I'm going to start with my weaker. 4 drops. And this one's going to get 8. And you should see it smoke a little bit. And then I always stir from weakest to strongest. Now both of these etches can touch your hands. I like to start with my etch at the edge. Since this doesn't have a very big edge, I'm going to go in the area that's the darkest so I don't burn it out. But I can also start with just a thin line in that area, move it down into this area. I would say anything 8 drops or weaker, you can put your hands in. You'll feel it a little bit if it's a 10-drop etch or something, but it's still not going to really burn your skin or anything. And it's really important to break up that old gum that's on the border. And I want to let these etches sit. I'm actually going to go a little bit longer, but about 3 minutes. Because these are weaker etches, I'm going to go just a hair longer. And then I'm just going to paint my hotter etch in this top area. And I want to use this liberally. I want to use a lot of it. You don't want to just carefully paint it in. You want to blob it in there really good. And it's not unusual to see a little bit of bubbling. It's called effervescence, so that's normal. So this is called spot etching. The etch kind of knows where to go, so if you like miss a little bit, it's not going to hurt anything. What this is doing though is it's making sure that those areas that are bare stone stay bare stone so that the drawing doesn't fill in. And you want to watch for, like if something opens up or burns out, you'll see it usually. And then I'm going to just let it percolate. You can take your leftover etch if you want, or your hot etch, and paint your edges, and that'll make them behave better when you go to print. But try not to get too much of that in your light part of your image. And then we're going to let that sit for about 3 minutes. So these are called cheesecloths. But anyway, these are for buffing down, and the way that you prepare these, one of them can be a little bit messier because you're going to use it as kind of a mop to get that first layer off. The other one has to be folded in a way, kind of how you fold a tarlatan. Technically it's a little different because you want more flat area here. But we're going to use this to buff down. The buff down is extremely important because it does a couple of things. It pushes the gum even more so that it gets to where it needs to go, especially in these really small areas in here. It also makes it so that you can wash out your image. If you don't buff down tight enough, you can't wash it out because the solvent can't get through the gum. So this is really important. So what I usually do is I start with I have two cheesecloths. One that, I usually use an older one because it doesn't have to be that clean. And I try to get rid of the gum without slopping it all over the table, then you have less cleanup. So you get that first layer of gum off like this, and then this is really important. You want to use small circles, and you want to buff that down very tight. That's what we call buffing down tight. You don't want to just keep moving the same old gum around, so you want to find a clean part of this to finish with. And you want to really, I then start in the image area and work my way out, because I can have gum that's too thick here, but it can't be thick over the image area. So I buff down really tight, and it's not unusual for the drawing material to come off. That's perfectly normal. You can buff so hard that you start to actually remove your drawing. That's okay, because the stone knows what's there. The stone only cares about grease. So if your image looks weird, like it looks like you're washing it out, the stone has already grabbed onto it and bonded with it. This is now the end of the first etch. So this should sit ideally overnight. The longer the better. If you're in a quarter system, you don't have that luxury, so overnight is good. But if you can go 2 days, that's great. You know, a month is really great. But stone lithography likes time. It likes things. This drawing has sat for a really nice long time, so it's really nicely in that stone. And now we want the etch to sit overnight. So this is the washout phase, and what we're going to do is actually wash the crayon drawing off of this, and we're going to use solvent, and solvent does not dissolve gum arabic. So what we have on here right now is called a gum stencil. So we've already first etched it, and the gum is buffed down really tight. All the areas that we call non-image areas, where there's no drawing material, are absorbing gum, and there's actually, it's a semi-permanent gum layer called an adsorbed, with a D, not a B, gum layer that bonds with the calcium carbonate of the stone and creates a permanent or semi-permanent water-loving area. So anyway, those areas right now have gum on them. The solvent doesn't dissolve gum, so when I do this is always the scary part of lithography. What's going to happen is we're going to actually lift the drawing material out of here with the eyes apart. This is why it's really important to have a really tight gum stencil layer so that we can wash out the drawing material. A lot of this won't wash out, but most of it will. To do this, you want to use a generous amount of isopar, which is the solvent we use. You can also use lithotine, which is a stronger solvent. You can let this sit for a little while too, but you don't want to use a lot of pressure, but you're using pretty firm pressure. You don't have to be afraid of it, you can press, but you don't want to be sanding the drawing off. And you want to do this until as much of the drawing material will wash out as possible. So when you run your rag over it after a while, you won't get any more material off. As you can see, so the drawing's basically vanishing. It seems like it's vanishing, but to the stone it's still there, because the stone is starting to absorb the grease from the drawing material. So the stone only cares about grease, it doesn't know what the drawing looks like. This can take a while if you've had the drawing on there for a long time. It'll take longer, or if you're washing out, which we'll do later when it's in ink, it can sometimes take a long time. But what I want to do now is I'm going to absorb a little bit of the excess isopar with this pick wipe, but then I also have a nice layer of isopar on this rag. This is called asphaltum, liquid asphaltum. It reinforces what we call the print base, which is the part that's going to grab ink when we roll it up. This, like everything in lithography, you want to put it on everywhere, first of all, but then you want to buff it down really thin. If this is too thick, your drawing's going to get too dark. So I take this with a little bit of isopar on it, not a lot, but just enough to spread it easier, and then make sure you get, instead of a big giant blob in one part of the pick wipe, I usually do this. And then kind of smear it around a little bit. Now I want to get it everywhere on here, and then I'm going to do two steps. I'm going to apply it, so I want to get it across the surface as quickly as I can, and then I'm going to find a clean part of this pick wipe and buff it down. So the first part is, I usually use circular motions like this, and it's going to go on really heavy at first, and then you're going to spread that around. Go in small circles so it gets everywhere. And don't worry if it gets on the borders, it doesn't hurt anything. But I want to make sure that I have it everywhere. So look at all the corners, look everywhere. Find a clean part of this and bump it down really, really tight. And you want this to be a really light, like coffee with cream in it color. And it needs to be streakless and perfect. So go in like just alternating layers. It doesn't matter what it's like at the edge, just the image area is what matters. So right now what's happening is the asphaltum looks like it's smearing everywhere, and if I didn't have a gum stencil on it, it would smear everywhere. It looks like it's going everywhere, but the gum is keeping it off of the stone in those areas, so it's riding on top of that gum. So that's the rub up. The next step we're going to do is the roll up. This step is called the roll up, and I always like to let the asphaltum sit for at least 5 minutes. If you go longer than that, that's fine. This is roll-up ink. The roll-up ink is a combination of a stickier 1921 roll-up ink and 1803, which is super stiff. You can't even get it out of the can. This stays out. It basically turns into rubber because people roll so much water into it. You don't have to clean it up when you're done. And we use these leather rollers, and leather rollers are preferable for this step because they deposit ink usually when you press like this, and when you pull back, it's picking up ink too, so it's pulling ink out of where you don't want it, and it's also depositing where you do want it. So that nap, that texture, is really good at pulling ink out too. So it keeps ink from going where it's not supposed to go. This ink is what we call thixotropic, which means it never dries. It kind of just stiffens up. And so when you first come to use the slab, you don't want to just go and start rolling up your stone because it won't have enough tack. So you need to roll it out enough to heat it up so that the tack gets renewed in the ink. So when you use one of these rollers, remember rollers are these, brayers are the ones with the metal handles or the metal brackets, but these are called rollers. You go up and back and you keep a loose grip on it, you go up and back and you give it like a quarter or half a flip like this. So if you watch up and back, little flips, otherwise you're just going to be putting the same ink on the same surface every time you roll. So if you just go like this, it's not really going to spread out the ink or mix it well. You also want to roll in a few different directions, especially when it's a new slab like this. You want to roll it out for about a minute or two. This is pretty new, so I don't have to roll it out that long. I've already done that. Get that nice and warmed up, and that's the first step. Then you want to come over to your stone with asphaltum in it. I have 2 water bowls. I have one that has cold water in it. Make sure it's cold water. Sometimes I put a little bit of gum arabic in there, but I usually just do that when I'm printing. You don't have to do that when you're just rolling up like this. I have 2 sponges. One is usually dirtier than this. One is for like dirty work, which is what we're going to start with. And the other one is for when I go to print, or when I go to roll this up with ink. The process that I'm going through here is exactly the same process you're going to see when we print, where we're going to take the asphaltum off with water, take the asphaltum and gum off with water, and then start rolling it up. If you roll ink over a dry stone, it doesn't know where to go. It's just going to go everywhere. This is where the ink and water thing that you hear about in lithography works. So when there's a thin film of water on here, it only sticks to the non-image area. When I roll ink, it'll go wherever the water is not. So you'll see that. So the first step, we want to get rid of the gum stencil. And with that, the asphaltum will come off too. So you want to be careful with a drawing this delicate. I'm not putting a lot of water on it because water is actually the dangerous part of this equation. It can actually burn out a delicate image. So be patient. If all of the asphaltum doesn't come off, the ink will pull it off, and you'll see that too. So you want to just, at this point, don't wring your sponge out in your clean water bowl. You use this to get water on your sponge, and you wring it out in what I call the spittoon, so your dirty water bowl. And you're going to see that the gum is going to start to, as the water breaks down that gum, the asphaltum is going to start to lift off. But also notice that now you can see the asphaltum sticking to the drawing, where the drawing used to be. And this to me is sort of the magic part of lithography. Like the image comes back in this sort of nice brown color. Now the areas that didn't wash out originally are still going to print. They're just going to probably take a little longer to ink up. So once that layer of asphaltum is taken off, I don't use that sponge anymore, and I switch to my clean sponge. So I always have dirty sponge and clean sponge. And now I'm going to start rolling this up. So we charge, this is called charging the brayer. And you want to go over it enough times to kind of smooth it out and warm it up a little bit. right before the roller hits it, you put a very, and this is too much water, you pretty much wring your sponge out so it's dry. And then you just put a thin layer of water. And on this step, you want nice, quick roller strokes. So you just want to go like this. And go over about 5 or 6 times, and then charge up your brayer again. You want to roll this up, roll it up until it looks like your drawing did at the beginning. So see how very thin, streakless layer of water, that's really important. This good stone like this will stay wet for a long time. And I'm rolling fairly quickly, like a middle speed. If you're having trouble getting it to ink up, you can roll a little bit slower. Slower roller will deposit more ink, faster roller will pick up more ink. You still have some brown showing, so you want to roll it up until that brown goes away. And I'm going to roll in different directions too, because sometimes the stone might be a little bit bowed or just misshapen. And for some reason that middle isn't rolling up quite as fast as the rest of it. This is normal with stones. Parts will roll up faster than others. So we do want to get that middle section to roll up. And I'm rolling kind of fast because I don't want to over ink the other parts as I'm trying to get that part to roll up. If you're getting little areas of scumming, which is ink where you don't want it, don't worry about it yet. There's just a little tiny area that isn't inking up as fast as the other parts. And I'm not recharging because I want to make sure I'm not over inking. And the drawing is magically coming back. It's okay if this is a little darker than your original image. In fact, you kind of want it to be a little darker. It's hard to tell probably, but I'm using very little water. I'm not using much water at all. I don't want to over ink it. I think we're good. Okay, so that's the roll up. And the next step we're going to do is the second etch. Okay, so this is in the roll-up ink, and we're going to second etch it. And to do that, we decided with this image, a 4-drop etch over the whole thing is the way to go. So we have our 4-drop etch here. I'm going to apply it with a brush just because I want to be careful of burning out areas. But I want to remember to rosin and talc, because what the rosin and talc does is it creates little sponges and it helps the etch go over evenly and also get down to the exposed areas of the stone, especially in these really delicate areas here. So we're going to use a little bit of rosin. And again, you just want to, and this also makes the buff down a lot cleaner. One of the things that rosin and talc, well talc especially, will stabilize the ink so that it doesn't smear as much. When I forget to rosin and talc, I notice that the ink is a lot smearier. So rosin and talc. And I usually use a pig white for the talc. Be careful if you're using rosin, you don't want to use too much of it and have a big cloud of it because it's not good to breathe. I'm going to just brush this on. And I want to be real generous with this. I don't have to be, you want to make sure there's plenty of gum arabic acid mixture. When you do this, you don't want to be scratching this with your brush or anything. So you want to make sure there's a lot of etch on there. It's okay if it bubbles a tiny bit. If it's a hotter etch, this etch should not bubble. So I mean, if you're using like a 10-drop etch or a 14-drop etch, it should bubble. Anyway, if you roll up your image and it rolls up just perfectly and everything looks good, you can just repeat your first etch because that means it was good. If things get really dark really fast, you want to go hotter with your etch so that you can burn them back in. But you're not going to fix it. If you etch badly the first time, you can't completely fix it. You can nudge it in a direction. That's about the best you can do. So that sits for 3 minutes, and then we buff it down. And if you want to be brave, you can print, in an hour or 2 hours. I like to wait at least 3 hours, but a lot of times I am impatient. If you can leave it overnight, 24 hours, that's ideal. It's not unusual though, no matter what. The rule is first etch, second etch, but you may third or fourth etch. I mean, if you have, something really delicate that wants to fill in, hit it with a couple of extra etches, just proof it and then etch it again. It'll behave a lot better and your addition will you'll be able to get a bigger addition without any problems. Okay, so this second etch we let sit for a little longer than 3 minutes. So now we're going to remove the gum, and we have 2 cheesecloths that are balled up. One is I use as a mop to kind of get that first layer off pretty quickly. And I start with the edges so that I don't splot gum all over the place. I always try to keep things as clean as possible so I don't have a lot of cleanup at the end. And just get that first layer off, and you want to do this pretty quickly because gum gets sticky really fast. So just get that first layer off, and then you want to buff it down really tight. And one of the things you'll notice that if you are doing this right, you'll start to get a little ink on your tarlatan. But you don't want to keep moving the same gum around, so you want to find clean parts of the tarlatan as you're wiping, but you want to do that quickly. And you'll notice more resistance, but you want that to be a pretty tight ball. You don't want to use, you don't want to be going like this. That doesn't do anything. So you want to keep it a tight ball that fits in your hand. Really, it's really the most important that it's buffed down tight over the image. If you have build up around your edges, that doesn't hurt anything. It just has to be able to wash out really easily. And just buff it down nice and tight. It should feel like glass when you go over it like that. And that's it. That's ready to put away, and whenever you feel like printing it, pull it out and print it. Okay, we're going to keep the ink information really basic now, because every time you proof, whether you're going to print in color or not, you want to, especially with a stone, you want to kind of sneak up on it. So you want the stiffest ink you can get away with. And we're using this Shop Mix Black, the 2244 graphic chemical ink. But even if you're just pulling an ink straight out of the can, you want to make sure you stir it around a little bit to warm it up before you roll it out. And one mistake that a lot of beginning lithographers make, or beginning printmakers make, is they'll mix their ink right in the middle of their slab. You're mixing, this is a reservoir of ink that you're going to take from to replenish where you're rolling out. If you're using black ink, you can use these leather rollers, not the same leather roller you use for the roll-up black. This is for black only though. If you're printing with color, you do not use these. If you're printing with color or a mixed black, you want to make sure that you're mixing that beforehand. But anyway, we're going to start really simple with this stiff black. Anytime you print a stone for the first time, even if you're going to print it in green or whatever color you're going to print it in, you still want to roll it up with black first because it kind of reinforces, it gets it used to printing. Stones they all have different personalities. Some of them print well right away. Some of them you have to work at a little bit. You want to be really careful. We're printing this stone a little bit faster than normal. Normally you want to let that second etch sit a little longer than we're letting it. But we're kind of impatient to see it, and that's okay. Just make sure that you don't keep printing it if it's filling in or not printing it the way you want it, because that'll tell the stone that that's how you want it to print. So if it starts to go weird, then you want to just cut your losses, wash out your stone, and then roll it back up and etch it again. And then the next time you print it, it'll behave really nicely. Unlike other litho matrices, a stone lithograph gets better each time you bring it out and print it again. I want to roll out a pretty thin slab, so I take about maybe a thin pencil width of ink, and I want to take my roller and put it out and just make a line about as wide as that roller is. And just try not to have like big blobs of ink in any one place. Just kind of make a nice even line. Now this roller is pretty newly scraped, so it doesn't have a lot of ink already on it. Sometimes you don't need very much ink because this gets loaded up with ink. So it's going to take a while to roll out. So you want to take your time. It's okay if it rolls out slowly. You can make it go faster by rolling in different directions and by flipping. But roll it out until it's a nice opaque but thin slab. You shouldn't hear slurping. It should be nice and quiet. You shouldn't see any texture ever. This should be like a perfectly smooth layer of ink. So that's good for that. Okay, so this is going to be how to print and how to set up to print. So this stone has been second etched. So it's in gum, but since it sat for about 4 days, I actually reactivated the gum. I would say that if it's going to sit longer than 2 days, you should put a new coat of gum on and buff it down really tight again so that it washes out better. So before I wash out the stone and start to ink it up, I'm going to set up the press. So I have these, which we call blocking, which pushes the stone out from the edge of the press. If you put the stone right on the edge here, that press can't travel all the way to the end of it. So we have to block it so that it comes out. And you want to keep it relatively square, but occasionally you'll have a stone where the image isn't square and you can turn it. I want to pick a scraper bar. This is called a scraper bar. A scraper bar that is narrower than my stone, because if it goes off of it like this, there's so much pressure. When you exert pressure on the stone to make a print, this can actually push up into the scraper bar and it'll be staple shaped. So the next person that prints is going to end up with a dark part here and a dark part here, nothing in the middle. So you want to make sure that the scraper bar is just as wide as your stone, but it has to be wider than the image, otherwise it won't print. The scraper bar goes up in here, and you want to just line the center up with this little nut here, and you just tighten it tight enough to hold it. You don't have to tighten it really tight because the pressure of the press is going this way. It's going to keep it in there pretty well. And then you want to bring your stone up to the scraper bar and just line it up so that it's not coming off the stone. It's okay if it's more on one side than the other, but as long as it's over your image, it's going past your image and not coming off the edge of the stone. And then, this is really important, when the scraper bar comes down onto this, and when I exert the pressure onto it, the scraper bar is going to come down on the stone and it's going to come off of the stone, and it's going to be covered by what's called a tympan when I print it, so I'm not going to be able to see through it. So this is going to go over everything. If I don't do that and I just guess, if the scraper bar hits here, it's going to break the scraper bar. If the scraper bar, if you run it too far and then it comes and the scraper bar goes off of the stone, it'll lift it up and slam it down and usually break it. So you don't want to break your stone. So you want to make sure the scraper bar stays on. To do that, you're going to mark your starts and stops. So you have one piece of tape on the unmoving part of the press, and then you're going to mark on the bed that's moving where it starts and where it stops. And then just eyeball where it's going to come onto the paper. This is a bleed print, so the paper goes right to the edge of the image. So I'm just going to go a little bit before the image starts, put a piece of tape down. And I have a little bit of buffer here, so I should be okay if I go a little past my mark. And then I want to go past the end of the image and put another, and you can adjust these as you print if you're noticing that you're missing part of your image. And now I'm all ready to print. But I'm going to go through the washout again. So you want a clean pig wipe for your washout. I'm using a used pig wipe because we used it for asphaltum before, so that's okay to do. And you can do this step. If you're printing with black ink, you can do this step and then set up your black ink while you're waiting for the asphaltum to set up. Or you can have everything out beforehand. If you're printing with color, have everything rolled out and ready to go beforehand, just because it's going to take a long time. So the first thing I want to do is wash this out with Isopar and make sure that you have a gum stencil in here. If you for some reason put your stone away without gum on it, this is not a good thing to do. You want to get as much of the ink as what will come out, and ink will come out usually better than drawing material does, so you can get this pretty clean. The washout isn't quite as crucial when you have it in ink as it is when you have drawing material, but you still want to get as much material out as possible so it doesn't over ink. Look, if you didn't wash out at all, what will happen is it's really easy for it to fill in and over ink. And this will never wash out clean again. It'll always have this sort of brown haze like this, the grayish haze. I'm going to get asphaltum all over the stone, and then I'm going to buff it down very quickly, and this all has to be done quickly. So you want to get it on there first. Make sure you get it everywhere. You don't want to miss any spots. And then you want to take the clean pig wipe and buff it down real tight. Make sure there's no streaks. You can press pretty hard when it gets buffed down like this, and then you're going to leave that for about 5 minutes. Okay, so here's our stone with a layer of asphaltum. The asphaltum is sticking to where the image area is because I washed out through the gum. But there's what we call a gum stencil on here. And right now it looks like asphaltum's covering everything. But when I wet this, it's going to break down the gum that's underneath the asphaltum. So anywhere there's gum, the asphaltum's going to lift off and my sponge is going to be able to pick it up. If the sponge doesn't pick it up, when I start rolling it, the sticky ink will pull it off. So don't scrub this. You don't need to scrub it. You just need to gently clean it. This is the same water I'm going to use to print, but right now I have what I call my dirty sponge. And dirty sponge is for taking off asphaltum like this. You don't want to use your nice printing sponge for that. This water has a little tiny bit of gum arabic in, which I usually do when I print. You can see that it's kind of an orangey color from the gum arabic. Don't put a lot in there, just a little bit. And that's called a fountain solution. It helps kind of reactivate the gum when you sponge it. But you can use a little bit of extra water at the beginning, but remember, water can burn out your image, so especially light areas of your image, so you don't want to leave a pile of water on here once it starts to get clean, once you see the gum start to come off. And you can see it's like magic. Wherever there was a gum stencil on bare stone, the asphaltum is lifting off. If you left that asphaltum sit on there for a long time, which is okay to do, it's going to take longer to take this off. But just be patient, don't scrub. Let the water do the work, and then later just let the roller do the work. The roller will pick up all the asphaltum. So it'll look like it's filled in, which right now I look at it and I'm like, oh my god, this is terrible. This image is all filled in. That'll all those little particles of asphaltum will lift off as I go. See what I'm doing is I'm dipping my sponge in here and I'm wringing it out in my spittoon. This is my dirty water bowl. You don't want to get asphaltum particles in your clean water. And I'm using a pretty wet sponge, but I'm not soaking it anymore. We can switch to, we're going to switch to our clean sponge, and I'm fortunate because I have someone sponging for me. I'm going to ink, and Lexi's going to sponge. Sponging is one of the most important parts of lithography, and everyone's like they're worried about getting the ink the right consistency, and that's important, but sponging is actually, if anything, more important. It has to be the exact right amount of water. It can't be too much water, and it can't be too little water. So I have it charged. And you want to make sure that even if you did roll out your slab, you always want to re-warm up your ink before you print. And I'm going to count the number of passes and cycles. So this is a pass, once up and back. That's a pass. And then, since this is a little narrower than my stone, I'm going to go back and forth. So I'm actually going to do 4. And I'm going in different directions, just make sure I get it nice, even and clear. So 1, 2, 3. So each time when I recharge, that's called a cycle. So each time up and back is a pass, and each time I stop is a cycle. So this is a pass, another pass. So I did 3 cycles. You only want to sponge after your last cycle if, like what's happening here, we're getting a little bit of scumming on the edges. And we're going to proof on newsprint. And we want our first proof to be light. And we're going to set our pressure on the first proof. Make sure that this gear is disengaged. Otherwise, when you do this, it'll spin and whack you in the arm. So we're going to go to the beginning. A little bit of tipping grease on there. And you only have to do this once. Maybe if you have a big edition, you might have to do it part of the way into your edition. But this will raise and lower the bar. If you go this way, it raises it, and this way it lowers it. The lower it goes, the more pressure it gives. If you come in and it's loose, the best thing to do is to engage it. Make sure you're on your start here. Crank it down till it's nice and tight. And then crank it down probably about a half a turn more, maybe a third. And just make sure it's nice and snug, and you can fine tune that as you print. And then you're just going to engage it at the start. Engage this gear, and sometimes you have to shake that a little bit to get it in there, and then crank it until you're stopped. Disengage the gear, and then pull this back. I pull it all the way back. Don't let this slam because it's really bad for the frame of the press to let it slam. And then I want to look at this, and I want it to be light. And this is actually pretty dark. The only thing I worry about, it's okay to have a nice print at the beginning, but you worry about it filling in. So we're going to back off a little bit. We're not going to do a back proof yet. If this is way too dark, what you're going to want to do is do what's called a back proof. So you're going to print without re-inking, just to strip some of the ink off, and then you're going to either cut down on the amount of ink, or you're going to cut down on the number of cycles and passes. Normally, though, when you're printing something, especially for the first time, it's going to be really light at the beginning, and you're going to gradually build it up till it gets darker. So this is probably because I loosened the ink up a little more than last time. I'm going to cut back on the number of cycles and passes, and we'll print one more proof and see what happens. I'm also going to, I'm speeding up how fast I go with the roller too, just to make sure it doesn't overink. So we're actually going to cut off a whole cycle of ink. So I'm going to go in this direction, and then we're going to print it. Oh, that drywall.
Is that filling in like your?
Yeah, but it was, yeah, this is drywall, so. Did that get rid of it? Yeah. Yeah, it's a little salty. Now I'm going to go back in too much. Yeah, we could probably go back. I think it'll get darker if we increase the number of passes on this end, so that because we're starting there with the fuller roller. And try only rolling this way and see what happens. The weird thing about stone lithography is rolling pattern is really important, because if you're trying to control. Still high. That's weird.